So I know not everyone plans on making the winter meetings this year, or is able to make the winter meetings. So I kind of want to run through a preview of the topics that I have to discuss, and so that way, if you don't plan on making it, you can maybe argue in a message board, or even if you do plan on making it, can be kind of helpful so you know what we plan on discussing. So we got some small tweaks. I think it's gonna. At the start of this league, I always kind of thought that it would take a few years to kind of tweak some things to keep bringing it closer and closer to a more realistic experience and get rid of some of the fantasy type cheats that make fantasy kind of lame, in my opinion. So one thing that's brought to me is, since we're trying to make it realistic, do a 25-man roster. It's not something I feel too strongly about either way. We could do it. Although, if we do, it's not going to change the maximums for starting pitching, relief pitching, which is 7 and 5 respectively, which is also 2 extra than the actives. And we could raise the minor league rosters to make it a 25-man roster and a 40-man roster to kind of make that a little more realistic. Because I can see if a lot of teams are drafting guys that might take 4 or 5 years to get through the minor leagues to make it to the major leagues, then they might end up filling their minor league rosters, and then it could also be a deterrent against trading for new picks. So it might be worth it to kind of expand those rosters from 12 to 15 as well. Fix the rookie limits. I don't really think this is a discussion. I think it's probably just a mistake I made, so we'll change that from plate appearances to at-bats. The break camp position rule, that's something I kind of set a precedent on a little bit last year. So Stats LLC, they're the ones that kind of set everything for Fantrax as far as statistics go, and they also do positions. Well, sometimes if they know that a player is going to change positions ahead of spring training and with enough time, they'll actually give that player that position eligibility. However, it doesn't seem like that always happens that quickly, and it seems kind of hit or miss. So if we adopt this rule, it would be like, if a player was a starter, but now the team's going to use him as a relief pitcher, or, a player was a left fielder, now he's going to be a first baseman, something like that. You could trade all the other positions for the new position. So if he had second base, left field, right field, and in the future he's going to be first base, and a player or a team wants to use him as a first baseman and doesn't want to wait for him to get the 12 games to be a first baseman, they could trade the other positions for the new one, and then other positions can be re-earned. So if you get 12 more positions at second, so that guy plays first and second, then they would have first and second, but you would have to give something up to get something. And we did that last year. I offered it to one team that declined it, so I could be fair, but we also did it with a starting and relief pitcher. I don't know, it kind of makes it hard when you hear a guy's going to be a relief pitcher, so you kind of pencil him in to be a relief pitcher, then he's a starter, and then the next thing you know, you have 8 starting pitchers, so you're illegal. Not the fairest thing. The trade deadline, last year we had end before the minor league draft. I don't know, it kind of gave it a deadline feel, but it does make sense to have it go through the minor league draft, so you can always trade back. So if you have a first-round pick and then that guy's gone, maybe you can trade back and get like a better second or third-round pick or an extra pick in the future to get rid of that first-round pick. So it kind of makes sense to extend it throughout the minor league draft. So it might not be a hard date. It might be whenever the minor league draft ends, the trade deadline is over too. The weekend after the All-Star break, so what we end up doing is putting that weekend with the next week, but do we raise the min-maxes? So you have to have 4 starts, you have to make 27 or 28 innings pitched, you have to have 36 games played for hitters, and you have 10 max starts for starting pitchers. Do we change any of those? At least maybe probably raise up the minimums, but maybe keep the maximums at 10 for starters. I don't fully know. Divisions, we got rid of divisions last year, and I kind of see why we got rid of divisions, but at the same time, I like playing for I think the divisions give you something more to play for, because without them, you're just kind of playing to be in the top 6 and a little bit more so to be in the top 2. Last year, we had a 4-team tie for the second place, and you could have a 4-team tie for the division lead as well. That's done by tiebreaker, but it's going to split that stuff out a little bit more, and then during the season, you're playing just to win your division, really. Then from there, you enter the playoffs, and if you win your division, you get, to skip. Now, the two division winners might not be the two best teams, but the two division winners would be the two teams that get the automatic bye and end up in the payout rounds automatically. I really like the divisions. I kind of miss them. I think we should go back, but it's not something I feel strongly enough about either way, so I'd like discussion on that. Something that was brought up to me was about position eligibility. So if you're planning long-term and a guy changes position, that could change your plans. I think we're going to have to live with that, and you're going to kind of have to know. So, like, if you get a real unathletic guy that's playing third, maybe you got to know that he might switch to either left field or first base at some point, and you got to prepare for that. It makes defense a little bit more important because I would like defense to be more important in this league, and so far we're not able to do that. At some point, I'd love to make a good defensive stat that could be a full point, though. And that kind of takes care of. However, the one area that I could look at this is, we'll still have to have a center fielder, but could we do center field and two corner outfielders? Because corner outfielders are typically interchangeable. That's possible. So we can talk about that. And then retirement. The first part of that is we need to add in the rules for death and medically disabled. I already set a precedent for that last year, especially with the medically disabled with Prince Fielder. So we just let that contract come off that player's team. And death should probably be the same way because that's not anybody's fault, except for maybe that player, but still. The other question would be what happens if a player retires after he's being cut. Initially, I'm going to lean towards that you still have to pay him, but I guess I don't know. So those are some small tweaks. Then we got some free agency tweaks. I think free agency worked really well going through the message board last year, but a couple things. One, how does, like, say you put a bid out there and you didn't mean to do it, or you thought about it and you didn't realize that's a stupid bid. Can you pull back bids? That would only work for the initial bid only because if otherwise you reset that clock to 24 hours and you could change motivations on bidding if it's not the initial one. But if it is the initial bid, I can see that teams could go back and pull bid. I think I'd be fine with that. Maybe we set a time limit so you have to do it within the first 2 hours you threw your initial bid out there. Once again, this would only be initial bids, but I think that makes sense. And then a free agent lock date. This is something a lot of people pushed me for. So it would be in August. It would be before the playoffs. It would be probably before the last 2 weeks of the regular season. That way you can't add in a bunch of free agents to help you for that playoff push. Doing it that way might make it before the trade deadline because, once again, if the trade deadline gets moved to the end of the minor league draft, that does make it so it could go into September where this is already done. And this kind of does feed into another topic. Because the reason why I don't want to do it is because I recommend to everybody, and kind of going back to the last slide with the roster limits of the 25-man roster, once again, I'd always recommend to not fill your bench because you want to be somewhat flexible with bench spots and money. So don't spend all your money, don't fill your bench. At least is a recommendation. And so the free agent lock date kind of makes it seem like, as of right now, that if you have certain injuries in certain key places, you want a full bench. But even then, you might guess wrong, and a first baseman goes down, you don't have another first baseman. So that's the reason why I don't like it. But there's things coming up also that we can talk about in the winter meetings that would fix that as well. Some dirty play rules. So the minor league draft order right now, you can kind of tank and jump positions. That kind of happened to me a little bit last year, although I don't think it was intentional. But since we take it at the start of the draft or the week before, something like that, teams can flip-flop a little bit, and so teams could purposely flip-flop. And then if you know you're not going to make the playoffs or you're in the bottom, you can just make your roster completely illegal, which I hope people don't do now that I threw that out there. But, to tank and get the better pick. So we need a way to kind of help with that. So the different things we could do is move up the draft order set date even further so that teams aren't completely out of the playoffs yet. We could implement last year's standings with current standings, or we could even make it last year's standings, current standings are each 2/5 of the equation, and then money spent this year is 1/5 of the equation. So even if you're really bad, if you spent all your money, a team that's also really bad but didn't spend their money, gets the better pick than you do. So that might help a little bit with the tanking, although it still could be a problem. Some other dirty player things is right now we kind of allow teams to cut players they just signed. I don't know if I like that, because if you just outbid another team just because you wanted to outbid that other team, then you could cut that player right away and put that player on waivers. So maybe we implement a 7-day rostered period. I'm not sure on that, but I think that would kind of help fix those issues a little bit. So if you have to keep a player for 7 days at least, either you do that or you kind of don't do those dirty things. And then adding a player you cut. So last year we had 2 teams that did this, and honestly, it wasn't too abusive, but maybe it could be more so in the future. So they cut players and then they re-signed them for a little bit cheaper. So one things we could do is kind of make it tougher to cut, so that way we also don't have teams cutting like 30 or 40 players. We could do a limit there. Or I think we're also, and coming up, we're going to talk about the waiver wire process, which may actually kind of fix this anyway. So we'll get there. And then missed minor league draft picks. It's not really a dirty thing, but it didn't really fit on the other side of small tweaks. We had more teams that missed again. I don't want to just say too bad. They lost out there on their picks because of competitive balance. These teams need to be competitive. I think it's a better league when you have competitive teams. So last year we let those teams retake their picks in the offseason. This year somebody suggested to me to give them comp picks in the next year's draft. So it would keep their previous order. So if a team took their first round pick but missed their second, and another team missed their first round pick, after that year's draft is done, the team that missed their first round pick would get a comp pick before the team that missed their second round pick. Maybe that's the best way of handling that. It does devalue those draft picks. Those draft picks would be untradeable, but they'd still get the draft picks. They could still take a flyer on a player, and then later they could trade that player. So I guess I do kind of like that. So that's something we can talk about there. Then there's 2 kind of big changes that we probably need to talk about or need to make. The first of which is the waiver wire. We changed it last year, but I still think we have a ways to go on it, and maybe this is it. So it's suggested to me to do a full season waiver wire or even a full contract waiver wire. I think right now I'd lean towards the full season over the full contract, but we'll go through and explain what that means. Is maybe the original team waiving could not pick up their own players, but that could be a moot point based on a couple other things. So the waiver wire would get processed on certain days of the week. Maybe it's Wednesday, maybe it's Thursday and Sunday, maybe it's just Sunday, maybe it's just Monday, whatever it is. And then I can do a setting where that player has to be on the waiver wire for at least 24 hours, so that's good. So no waiving a player at 10:55 p.m. and having another team get them on waivers 5 minutes later and no one else pay attention. They will have to be on the waiver wire for at least 24 hours, so that's cool. Then the waiver wire will always pay the full penalty. It will not go down to $1, whether that player was claimed or not. And then the claiming team, they get the same contract, but half the salary rounded up. So instead of the contract being converted to the waiver wire contract where it can be optioned, if it's an ADC, they would have that player. If it's an ADC on the first year, they would have that player for another year, just at half the cost for that year and the next year. Then ADCs and FACs can be optioned, just like normal. However, the option goes by... Sorry, I just got a text. So then the option goes by what the original bid price was. So to go to... I'm sorry. Okay, so to go to the one example we had of a player picked up in waivers, David Price went down to $20 for that team because it was half the cost. Now, if that team wanted to, this is at the end of his normal ADC, so that team would get to, under the current system, that he's just going back to the auction pool. If we implement this system, it's not going to be retroactive. Sorry, Crackjack, you can't re-sign David Price now because it would change motivations and inspirations to get David Price. But in the future, if say that happened this upcoming year, and then next offseason, he could re-sign David Price, but it'd be at the $39 bid price, not at the $20 price. If we do full contract waivers instead of full season, would the waiver players go into the auction draft pool, or do they stay on waivers somehow? That's one of the reasons why I'm thinking I'd lean towards the full season instead of full contract waiver wire. And then the interaction with a free agent lock date. So after the free agent date is locked, are the players on the waiver wire still allowed to be picked up? My guess is yes. But I guess I'm not completely sure how everybody else would feel on that one. Then MLCs would never go to the waiver wire. That is, so if an MLC gets cut, they go to the free agency. They don't go to the waiver wire. And then if they get cut in the offseason, they go to the auction draft pool. But if they get cut in the offseason, typically they probably wouldn't be re-signed. So then they go into the auction draft pool anyway. So that's not like that's kind of a weird situation where they might get cut in the offseason. Typically, they just wouldn't get picked up on the option. The big cons are on this is going to create a lot more work for me. So I'll have to go in and we'll have to keep a waived player list, and then each week after that player doesn't get through on waivers, I'll have to go through and toggle them to back from being a free agent to waivers. So that's going to be a lot of work weekly for me. At least it'll build up. I don't know, maybe it won't be a whole lot of work, but it'll be some work. And then it's going to add complexity to the contract formulas on the roster spreadsheet. Off the top of my head, I'm not necessarily sure how I would do that. I think I would do that by keeping the bid price on the waiver wire sheet and then just converting the contract and just taking it to be half. And then if they re-sign it, we know what the original bid price was by the other sheet. That'd probably be the easiest way of doing it, but if I could write it into the formula, maybe I'd try to do that. The other big change would be the injury replacement players. So last year we had a team that was pretty decimated through injuries. They also made a bad trade, though, so I'm going to call them out on that, but just kidding. But they did have a lot of injuries, so I don't know. In real life, when you have an injury, even if you don't want to call up your big-time prospect, there's always like a AAA player that probably isn't that good, but he can fill that spot. Maybe one game he gets a big hit for you. So maybe we need a system like that. So I'd probably add a table to the roster spreadsheet. So you can sign a player to replace an injured player. Now this must go through the normal free agent process. So you have to put them up for bid at $3, and then after 24 hours, if they don't get bid up, then you win that player. If they do get bid up, then they can't be an injured reserve player. And then after the free agent lock date, you could add players as an injury replacement, and then I would do that pretty much immediately or when I can, because no one else can bid you up. So there's no point in waiting 24 hours on that. Then that player gets linked to the injured player, which means that when the injured player is recalled off the DL, then the replacement player must get dropped. And then at first I was thinking of making this non-transferable, but more realistically, it probably will be transferable because say your ace goes down, you sign a pitcher to replace him. When your ace comes back, if another pitcher goes down at the same time, you'd probably keep that other player as long as he's not terrible up. So in that case, I think it would be likely that they do get made transferable. I don't know if the cost should be free or if it should be $1. I'm kind of thinking it should be $1, and then after you drop that player, you don't get that $1 back. But I see the point of free too. And the point of it costing $1 is just so, you still have to pay that new player. And, if you it also kind of makes it so teams do have to be flexible. So if you realize you got to look at that option, then you're not going to spend all of your allowed budget. It's going to be limited spots. I don't know. 6 makes sense to me because then it's 1 a month, and our season plus playoffs is 6 months long. But we might go a little less than that. You cannot option that player because you don't really own that player. But a lot of people said to me that they think you should be able to. So I'm looking at the option of maybe you can, after a while, if you wanted to, you could purchase that player's contract, and then they would become an FAC instead of an injury replacement player. At that point, they would cost $5 because no one else is bidding against you for that player. Because you could have originally bid for them as a free agent, but you didn't. You bid for them as an injury replacement. And then you cannot purchase that contract after the free agent lock date. So I don't know. That's pretty explanatory. After that lock date, and if you want to purchase that player, you are not able to. And then those players cannot be re-signed. After the season, all the injury replacement players are going back to the auction draft pool. So if you do want to re-sign that player, you'll have to purchase them at $5 before the lock date, and then you can re-sign them from there with the $5 extension price per year. And then the other thing that we're going to have to talk about is the auction draft time limits. Currently, we're set for 90 seconds. Initial bid's 15 seconds, and I think the rebid is either 15 or 10 seconds. The original year, we did 35 seconds for nomination. That was too short. People complained. However, there was so many players that had to go through. Every roster needed 17 players. Some got a couple more, so it took a really long time. Last year, we upped it to 90, 15, 15, so I don't think it changed that. And it still took a while. There was less players, but we had a couple issues that hopefully we won't have this year. Maybe we wait until after the surveys are in, which are due February 25th. Is a Saturday, I think. They're due at 11 p.m. That's a hard date. We really need to get them in by then. You can turn them all in now and then edit them later. That's what I recommend doing. If you're going to edit them, though, make sure you edit them instead of doing a second survey. So far, a couple people have edited them, and they've done it correctly. I don't know what they've done for their survey because I haven't looked at them, and that's my promise to everybody is I'm not going to look at them. But I did look just to make sure that they edited it instead of redid a survey, and they did. So if we need a lot of players going through, a 90-second nomination bid is far too long. So we'll probably have to cut that in half if we have a lot. I guess we'll just have to see. But 35 was a little low, but at the same time we had so many players, you just won't get through it under 4 or 5 hours if you leave it at 90 seconds. So there's got to be a compromise there. So that's everything we're going to talk about at the winter meetings, unless other people bring up other topics. If they do, I'd rather them bring them up to me beforehand. But, it's all good.